The Art of Inner Calm, How to Control Your Reactions, is a practical guide that teaches you how to remain centered in stressful situations, manage emotional triggers, and respond with clarity instead of impulse. The audiobook blends psychology, mindfulness, and real-life techniques to help you stay composed when life feels overwhelming. Introduction: The Art of Inner Calm. How to Control Your Reactions begins by highlighting how much of our daily stress comes not from events themselves, but from the way we choose to react to them. The introduction explains that most people move through life on autopilot, letting emotions like anger, fear, or frustration dictate their actions, often leading to regret or strained relationships. It stresses the idea that true calm is not about ignoring problems or suppressing feelings, but about learning to pause, recognize triggers, and consciously decide how to respond with clarity. The opening sets the tone by showing that inner calm is a skill anyone can learn with practice, and that by gaining control over reactions, we not only improve our own well-being, but also create healthier interactions and a more balanced life. Chapter 1. Understanding Your Triggers. Chapter 1. Understanding Your Triggers begins by exploring the idea that our strongest emotional reactions rarely come out of nowhere, but are almost always set off by specific triggers, whether obvious or subtle, that touch a sensitive part of us and cause us to lose our calm. These triggers can be external, like a partner's criticism, a colleague's rude remark, heavy traffic, or a sudden financial worry, or they can be internal, rooted in old memories, deep-seated fears, unresolved trauma, or insecurities that we may not even consciously recognize. The chapter explains that every human being carries a collection of personal hot buttons, unique to their life story, and when those are pressed, the brain immediately shifts into survival mode, activating fight, flight, or freeze responses that can overwhelm logic and lead us to say or do things we regret. To gain control of our reactions, we must first become detectives of our own minds, carefully observing the patterns of when, where, and how we get triggered, because awareness is the key that opens the door to change. The chapter encourages reflecting on recurring situations, perhaps arguments with family members, moments of feeling dismissed at work, or sudden spikes of anxiety in social settings, and asking why these moments sting so strongly, what belief they challenge, and what underlying wound they might be connected to. It highlights the importance of noticing physical cues as well, such as a racing heart, clenched fists, shallow breathing, or flushed skin, because the body often knows we are triggered before the mind catches up, and these signals serve as early warnings that we are moving into reactive mode. Through this practice of awareness, we start to slow down the automatic chain reaction that normally occurs so quickly we barely notice it. Someone says something, we feel threatened, and before we know it, we have snapped back, shut down, or spiraled into stress. The chapter explains that while we may not have control over the triggers themselves, we do have the power to change how we meet them, but only if we take time to understand them first. By exploring personal history, reflecting on the stories we tell ourselves, and recognizing patterns of thought that keep getting repeated, we begin to see that many of our strongest reactions are less about the present situation and more about old pain resurfacing in new contexts. This understanding doesn't mean blaming ourselves for having triggers or expecting them to disappear overnight. Instead, it means practicing curiosity instead of judgment, asking ourselves questions like, "What exactly set me off here?" Or "Why do I feel so threatened by this?" and allowing the answers to emerge slowly over time. The chapter emphasizes that triggers are not weaknesses, but opportunities to learn more about who we are and what we value, because behind every emotional flare-up lies a clue about our unmet needs, our boundaries, or the parts of ourselves still waiting to be healed. It shows how keeping a simple journal of triggering events, what happened, how we felt, how we reacted, and what belief was touched, can gradually reveal patterns that we were blind to before, giving us the chance to anticipate and prepare for similar situations in the future. The chapter also discusses how certain triggers are universal, like rejection, loss of control, or feeling disrespected, while others are deeply personal, shaped by our upbringing, culture, and life experiences, which means that what might barely affect one person could feel explosive to another. By respecting these differences in ourselves and others, we start to develop compassion, recognizing that everyone reacts from their own history, and this awareness softens our judgments and helps us build healthier connections. Ultimately, the chapter paints a clear picture. Without understanding our triggers, we remain prisoners of our past, pushed and pulled by emotions we don't fully comprehend. But once we bring them into the light, we reclaim the freedom to pause, breathe, and choose our response with intention. This process is not about perfection but progress. Every time we notice a trigger and resist the urge to react automatically, we strengthen our inner calm and prove to ourselves that we are capable of growth. Over time, this awareness forms the foundation for emotional mastery, because it shifts us from living at the mercy of our impulses to living with a sense of choice, balance, and clarity. And that shift begins with the simple but powerful practice of understanding our triggers. Chapter 2. The Science of Calm. Chapter 2, The Science of Calm, explains that the ability to stay composed under pressure is not a mysterious talent, but a skill rooted in how the human brain and body are wired, and understanding this science is the first step toward mastering it. The chapter begins by describing how the nervous system reacts when we feel threatened, shifting into the fight, flight, or freeze response that floods the body with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, raising heart rate, tightening muscles, and narrowing focus as if survival is at stake. While this reaction is useful in life or death situations, it often becomes activated in everyday stresses, an argument, a deadline, or even a negative comment, causing us to overreact and feel overwhelmed by emotions that are disproportionate to the event. The chapter emphasizes that calm is not about eliminating stress altogether, but about learning to regulate this response so that we can bring the nervous system back to balance quickly. It highlights the role of the parasympathetic nervous system, sometimes called the rest and digest state, which counteracts the stress response by slowing the heartbeat, deepening the breath, and releasing tension throughout the body, restoring us to a state of clarity and composure. By practicing techniques that engage this calming system, such as mindful breathing, grounding exercises, or intentional pauses, we train the brain to recover faster from stress triggers, essentially rewiring neural pathways through repetition and practice. The chapter explains that calm also involves the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, problem-solving, and self-control, which tends to go offline when we are overwhelmed by emotion, leaving the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system, in charge. By understanding this, we see why people say or do things impulsively in moments of stress, and why building calm is about strengthening the ability of the prefrontal cortex to stay engaged, so we can respond thoughtfully instead of reacting instinctively. The chapter also explores the role of hormones and chemicals such as serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin, which support a sense of stability, connection, and well-being, and shows that cultivating calm is not only psychological but also physiological, influenced by sleep, nutrition, movement, and overall lifestyle. Small habits like steady breathing, mindful pauses, or even stepping away for a short walk help regulate these systems, proving that calm can be deliberately created rather than left to chance. The chapter underscores that calm is contagious. Our state of being influences those around us, and when we manage our stress response, we create a ripple effect of balance and stability in our environment. Finally, it reinforces the idea that calm is not the absence of strong emotions, but the ability to notice them, soothe the body, and let the mind remain steady enough to make choices that align with our values. By grounding the concept of calm in neuroscience and biology, the chapter demystifies it and makes it clear that anyone, regardless of temperament or background, can train their body and mind to move from chaos to composure, turning calm into both a science and a practice. Chapter 3. Mindfulness in Action. Chapter 3. Mindfulness in Action explains that the real power of mindfulness is not found in quiet meditation sessions alone, but in how we bring awareness and presence into the ordinary moments of daily life, where stress, distraction, and emotional triggers actually occur. The chapter emphasizes that mindfulness is simply the practice of paying full attention to what is happening right now without judgment. And while that sounds simple, it requires training because most people spend their days caught in autopilot, worrying about the past, predicting the future, or reacting to situations without clarity. By slowing down enough to notice thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations as they arise, we create a gap between stimulus and response. And in that gap lies the freedom to choose a calmer, wiser path, instead of letting emotions control us. The chapter uses examples like eating a meal, having a conversation, or walking outside to show how even mundane activities can become opportunities for mindfulness when we pay attention to taste, sound, breath, or body movement with curiosity. Instead of rushing through, it also stresses that mindfulness in action doesn't mean ignoring emotions or pretending everything is fine. Rather, it means observing them like passing weather, acknowledging their presence without getting swept away, and responding with intention rather than impulse. The practice of pausing before reacting, whether it's taking 3 slow breaths before answering an angry remark or noticing tension in the shoulders before it turns into frustration, becomes a tool to prevent escalation and maintain calm under pressure. The chapter highlights that mindfulness can be integrated into work, relationships, and personal challenges, making it practical and accessible instead of something limited to a meditation cushion. It also explains that repeated practice strengthens the brain's ability to stay present, calming the amygdala and enhancing the prefrontal cortex, which supports decision-making, patience, and emotional balance. The beauty of mindfulness in action is that it turns everyday life into practice grounds, so the next time stress arises, the mind is already trained to observe rather than react. By cultivating this presence, we build resilience against chaos, deepen our sense of appreciation for small moments, and create healthier, more compassionate interactions with others. The chapter concludes by reminding us that mindfulness is not about perfection or constant calm, but about returning again and again to awareness, even after being distracted. And each return strengthens our capacity to live with clarity, peace, and intentional action. Chapter 4. Breathing and Grounding Techniques. Chapter 4. Breathing and Grounding Techniques explains that one of the most immediate and effective ways to regain calm and control in stressful situations is by using the body as an anchor through breath and physical awareness, since the body is always in the present moment while the mind tends to wander into fears of the future or regrets of the past. The chapter emphasizes that breathing is not only a biological function, but also a powerful tool for regulating emotions, because deep, steady breaths signal the nervous system to shift from the stress-driven fight-or-flight mode into the restorative, rest and digest state, lowering heart rate, easing muscle tension, and allowing the mind to think more clearly. It introduces simple practices such as diaphragmatic breathing, where the breath is drawn deeply into the belly instead of shallowly into the chest, and box breathing, where one inhales, holds, exhales, and pauses in equal counts to create balance, and rhythm that calms the body within minutes. Alongside breathing, grounding techniques are presented as equally important because they redirect the mind's attention from spiraling thoughts back into physical sensations that anchor us in the present. This might include noticing the feeling of feet pressing into the floor, running hands over textured objects, observing 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste, or simply bringing awareness to posture and bodily contact with the environment. The chapter explains that these techniques are particularly helpful during moments of anxiety, panic, or emotional flooding, when the mind feels out of control, because the act of returning focus to the body creates a pause that interrupts the cycle of stress. It also highlights that these practices are not meant to suppress emotions, but to create enough space and calm so that emotions can be processed thoughtfully rather than acted upon impulsively. By making these techniques part of daily routine, such as starting the morning with slow breathing, grounding during a stressful meeting, or practicing before sleep to release the day's tension, they become second nature and can be used quickly. In high-pressure moments, the chapter further notes that over time, consistent practice rewires the nervous system, making the body less reactive to stress triggers and more resilient overall. It concludes by reinforcing that breathing and grounding are not complicated skills reserved for experts, but simple, accessible practices available to everyone at any moment, acting as instant switches to bring the mind and body back into balance, restore perspective, and allow for calmer, more intentional responses in any situation. Chapter 5. Reframing Your Perspective. Chapter 5, Reframing Your Perspective, focuses on the idea that while we cannot always control what happens to us, we can control the meaning we give to events. And by shifting perspective, we change the emotional weight of experiences and open space for calmer, wiser responses. The chapter explains that much of human stress comes not directly from circumstances, but from the interpretations layered onto them. Seeing a mistake as failure instead of growth, viewing criticism as an attack rather than feedback, or perceiving challenges as punishments instead of opportunities to adapt. By learning to reframe, we retrain the mind to pause before defaulting to negative assumptions and instead consider alternative viewpoints that reduce tension and invite clarity. The chapter introduces practical strategies such as asking, "What else could this mean?" or "How would I see this if I were less stressed?" and encourages replacing rigid black and white thinking with flexible interpretations that recognize complexity. It emphasizes that reframing is not about ignoring difficulties or pretending everything is positive, but about broadening perception so we are not trapped in narrow, stress-inducing narratives. For example, losing a job might feel devastating, but reframed it could become a chance to explore a new career path or develop resilience, while a heated argument could be seen not as the end of a relationship, but as a signal of areas needing communication and care. The chapter highlights that cognitive reframing is supported by neuroscience, as repeated shifts in perspective strengthen neural pathways that favor balance over panic, training the brain to look for solutions instead of dwelling on problems. It also touches on the role of gratitude and compassion as reframing tools, suggesting that deliberately noticing what is going right or considering the struggles of others helps reduce self-centered stress and build perspective. The chapter underscores that practicing reframing in small, everyday moments, like delays, mistakes, or misunderstandings, prepares us to use it effectively in larger crises because the habit becomes second nature. It also acknowledges that reframing takes effort at first, especially when emotions are raw, but each attempt builds emotional flexibility, making it easier to step back from negative spirals. Ultimately, the message is that perspective is powerful. Two people can face the same situation, and one may feel crushed, while the other feels motivated, and the difference lies in interpretation. By choosing to reframe consciously, we reclaim agency over how life affects us, shifting from victimhood to empowerment, from stress to strength, and from chaos to calm, which becomes a cornerstone of mastering inner peace. Chapter 6. Responding versus reacting. Chapter 6. Responding versus reacting explains that one of the most important skills for maintaining inner calm lies in understanding the crucial difference between reacting on impulse and responding with intention. Because while reactions are automatic and often emotionally charged, responses are thoughtful choices that align with our values and long-term goals. The chapter describes how reactions are driven by the emotional centers of the brain, especially the amygdala, which perceives threat and pushes us into fight, flight, or freeze, leading to behaviors like snapping at someone, shutting down in silence, or rushing into a decision without considering consequences. These reactions may feel satisfying in the moment, but often leave behind regret, damaged relationships, or unresolved problems. In contrast, responding requires a pause, a moment to breathe, regulate emotions, and engage the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of the brain that allows for perspective, empathy, and problem-solving. The chapter emphasizes that the pause does not have to be long. Even a few seconds of breathing or grounding can create enough space for clarity to emerge, and for us to choose words or actions that de-escalate rather than intensify a situation. It provides everyday examples, such as receiving harsh criticism at work, where a reactive approach might be to lash out defensively, but a responsive approach would involve acknowledging the feedback, managing the initial sting, and deciding later how to improve or clarify misunderstandings. Similarly, in relationships, reacting to a partner's sharp comment with anger often fuels conflict, while responding with curiosity or calm communication can transform tension into connection. The chapter also explains that responding does not mean suppressing emotions or avoiding assertiveness. Rather, it means expressing emotions in a way that is constructive, respectful, and consistent with who we want to be. It highlights that practicing self-awareness is key, because we cannot choose a response if we are unaware of our triggers, and building the habit of noticing physical signs like racing thoughts, clenched jaws, or rising heat in the body can alert us to pause before reacting. Over time, this practice strengthens emotional intelligence, helping us stay calm under pressure and making us more effective in leadership, relationships, and personal growth. The chapter stresses that the difference between reacting and responding ultimately defines the quality of our interactions and our peace of mind. Because reactions give power to circumstances and emotions, while responses reclaim that power and place it in our hands. It concludes by reinforcing that life will always present challenges, irritations, and surprises, but by choosing to respond rather than react, we transform those moments into opportunities for growth, respect, and resilience, proving that self-control is not about denying feelings, but about guiding them wisely toward outcomes that serve us and those around us. Chapter 7. Building Emotional Resilience. Chapter 7. Building Emotional Resilience explains that while inner calm can be practiced in individual moments, lasting stability comes from developing resilience, which is the capacity to recover from setbacks, adapt to change, and stay steady even when life is unpredictable. The chapter emphasizes that resilience is not about avoiding pain or pretending to be unaffected, but about cultivating the strength to bend without breaking, to process emotions without being controlled by them, and to see challenges as opportunities for growth rather than permanent defeats. It describes how resilience is built through consistent habits that strengthen both body and mind, such as maintaining healthy routines of sleep, exercise, and nutrition, which regulate stress hormones, along with practicing mindfulness and grounding to keep emotional balance during turbulence. The chapter also highlights the role of perspective in resilience, showing that people who can reframe struggles as temporary or meaningful tend to recover faster and maintain optimism even in difficulty. Emotional resilience is further strengthened by nurturing supportive relationships, since connection with others provides encouragement, perspective, and a reminder that we do not face challenges alone. The chapter underscores that resilience does not mean suppressing emotions. Rather, it involves acknowledging fear, sadness, or frustration, then processing those emotions in constructive ways, whether through reflection, journaling, or meaningful conversations. It also discusses the importance of flexibility, pointing out that rigid expectations make us more vulnerable to stress, while adaptability allows us to pivot and find new paths when circumstances shift unexpectedly. Another aspect of resilience described is self-compassion, the practice of treating ourselves with kindness instead of harsh criticism during setbacks, which builds inner strength instead of eroding confidence. The chapter explains that resilience develops like a muscle, growing stronger each time we face adversity and choose to respond with patience, problem-solving, and perseverance instead of despair. By highlighting real-life examples of people who endured hardships yet grew more grounded and wise, the chapter illustrates that resilience is not reserved for the strongest personalities, but is a learnable trait available to anyone willing to practice consistently. It concludes by reinforcing that building emotional resilience equips us not only to survive stress, but to thrive through it, turning obstacles into stepping stones, setbacks into lessons, and emotional storms into opportunities to deepen calm, clarity, and confidence in the face of life's inevitable uncertainties. Chapter 8. Applying Inner Calm to Relationships. Chapter 8. Applying inner calm to relationships explains that while cultivating calm within ourselves is vital, its true test and greatest value often show up in the context of our relationships, where emotions, expectations, and communication challenges can quickly spark conflict or misunderstanding. The chapter emphasizes that relationships, whether with family, friends, partners, or colleagues, are often the most triggering areas of life because they involve vulnerability, intimacy, and the need for connection. And when stress or disagreement arises, it is easy to react impulsively and damage trust. Inner calm, when applied here, becomes a stabilizing force, allowing us to listen more fully, respond thoughtfully, and de-escalate tensions rather than fuel them. The chapter explains that one of the most important tools is active listening, which requires setting aside the urge to defend or interrupt and instead focusing on truly hearing the other person, which not only reduces misunderstandings, but also makes the other person feel valued and respected. It describes how calm communication involves using measured tone, mindful word choice, and non-verbal cues like relaxed posture and steady breathing, all of which create an atmosphere of safety and openness. The chapter also discusses the importance of recognizing triggers within relationships, such as feelings of being ignored, criticized, or controlled, and learning to pause before reacting, so that these sensitive areas can be navigated with awareness instead of defensiveness. By practicing empathy, seeing situations from another's perspective, and remembering that others have their own triggers and stressors, we reduce the urge to personalize conflict and instead approach it with compassion. The chapter highlights that disagreements are inevitable, But conflict does not have to be destructive if calm is maintained, because calm allows space for negotiation, compromise, and mutual understanding rather than escalating arguments. It also emphasizes boundaries as a key aspect of applying inner calm, since remaining composed does not mean tolerating disrespect or overextending ourselves. Instead, it means setting limits with clarity and kindness, protecting our well-being, while honoring the relationship. The chapter points out that when we embody calm consistently, we become role models for others, and our steadiness can influence the emotional climate of entire families, teams, or friendships, creating ripple effects of trust and stability. It concludes by reinforcing that inner calm in relationships is not about winning arguments or avoiding difficult conversations, but about cultivating patience, respect, and emotional steadiness that allow relationships to grow healthier, deeper, and more resilient, even in the face of inevitable challenges. Chapter 9. Calm in Daily Life. Chapter 9. Calm in Daily Life explains that the ultimate goal of cultivating inner calm is not to keep it confined to moments of meditation or intentional practice, but to weave it into the fabric of everyday living, so that it becomes a natural way of moving through the world, no matter what challenges arise. The chapter highlights that daily life is full of small stresses. Traffic jams, workplace deadlines, household responsibilities, unexpected interruptions that may seem minor on their own, but collectively wear down patience and emotional balance. And it is in these ordinary moments that calm proves its greatest value. It emphasizes that by applying the techniques of awareness, breathing, grounding, reframing, and mindful responding in real-time situations, we transform them from sources of irritation into opportunities to strengthen resilience and clarity. The chapter describes how beginning the day with a simple, calm ritual, such as a few minutes of deep breathing, mindful stretching, or setting an intentional thought, can create a foundation that steadies the mind for the hours ahead. It shows how throughout the day, short pauses, like taking a mindful breath before sending an email, focusing on the feel of footsteps while walking, or observing the taste of food without distraction, act as anchors that keep us present and reduce stress accumulation. Calm in daily life also means noticing when the body signals tension, like a clenched jaw or shallow breathing, and using that awareness to step back before stress escalates. The chapter underscores that calm is not about eliminating busyness, but about moving through busyness with steadiness, staying engaged without being consumed by urgency. It explains that even in high-pressure environments, choosing to slow down internally by pausing before reacting, asking clarifying questions, or simply breathing deeply shifts the tone of interactions and improves effectiveness. Relationships benefit as well, since calm responses replace irritation with patience, fostering cooperation and trust in everyday exchanges. The chapter also touches on how calm supports decision-making, because when the mind is clear and not clouded by reactivity, choices become more thoughtful, leading to better outcomes in both small and significant matters. It acknowledges that stress will never disappear entirely, but insists that by practicing calm consistently, the nervous system learns to recover more quickly, making peace a default state rather than an exception. Ultimately, the chapter concludes that calm in daily life is less about grand practices and more about small, repeated choices that over time reshape how we experience the world, turning ordinary days into opportunities to live with presence, patience, and steady strength. Conclusion. The conclusion of the art of inner calm. How to control your reactions brings together all the lessons from earlier chapters and reinforces the central truth that calm is not about eliminating stress or silencing emotions, but about cultivating awareness, resilience, and choice in the face of life's inevitable challenges. It explains that through understanding triggers, learning the science behind calm, practicing mindfulness in action, using breathing and grounding techniques, reframing perspectives, choosing responses over reactions, building emotional resilience, applying these skills in relationships and integrating them into daily life, we create a toolkit that empowers us to meet difficulties with clarity rather than chaos. The conclusion stresses that inner calm is not a fixed state to be achieved once and for all, but a lifelong practice of returning to awareness each time we drift into reactivity, and every return strengthens the muscle of self-control and steadiness. It acknowledges that setbacks will occur and moments of losing composure are inevitable, but these are not failures. They are reminders to pause, reflect, and begin again with greater insight. By adopting calm as a guiding principle, we shift from being controlled by external events and internal storms to living with greater freedom, presence, and intentionality. The conclusion emphasizes that calm is not passivity. It is active strength, the ability to respond wisely instead of reacting impulsively, to create harmony in relationships, and to approach challenges with patience and perspective. It leaves the reader with the assurance that anyone, regardless of temperament or circumstance, can learn and embody this art, and that even small steps, one mindful breath, one reframed thought, one moment of choosing to pause, can ripple outward to transform not only personal well-being, but also the emotional climate of the world around us. In the end, the book reminds us that calm is both a gift to ourselves and to others, a way of living that turns turbulence into clarity, stress into growth, and reaction into thoughtful action, guiding us toward a life of steadiness, compassion, and quiet inner strength.